Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for today, which is April 29th, 2021. I'm going to be talking again about the danger of nuclear war. Some of you are wondering, why are we talking about this so much? Well, it's the most significant threat facing humanity today. Look, there are lots of reasons to be upset, lots of things that are being done by governments, by our own government, that are unjustifiable, that are grievances, people are suffering, people have to face terrible burdens. But none of them add up to the threat of the extinction of the human race, which comes from the policies being adopted under the direction of the British Empire and American intelligence and diplomatic networks that are tied to the British Empire. We just have to look at what Vladimir Putin said in his national address on April 21st to get a sense of the danger that we face. He talked about red lines that should not be crossed. And among those he mentioned were the buildup of a threat in Ukraine against Russia, which was launched by the president of Ukraine and backed by NATO and US networks, telling him that he would have full backing if he followed what he intended to do. And what he said he intended to do is take back Crimea and the Donbass. That's a red line, as Putin said. The threat of a coup in Belarus and the assassination of its president, that would be another red line. And what he said is that such things are commonplace. There's very little comment about these things. He said, quote, "Nobody seemed to notice. Everyone pretends nothing is happening." And he added, if these kinds of actions continue, know that Russia's response will be asymmetric, swift, and tough. Now, this was portrayed in the West as a very stern warning, as indeed it was. And it's backed up by comments by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and other Russian leaders. And yet what happens? The drive for regime change against Russia continues. On any given day, look at the various websites of the think tanks funded by the military-industrial complex and deployed as part of the shaping of Russia and China as an enemy image. I'm talking about the Center for New American Strategy, the Atlantic Council, the Council on Foreign Relations, and so on, Heritage Foundation, Jamestown Foundation. On any given day, they have online webinars talking about the threat from Russia, the danger to the rules-based order coming from those with a, quote, malign intent, unquote, from Russia and China. And most of these charges are bogus. They're frauds. They're made up. But the drive for regime change continues against Russia. You have the sanctions over Navalny, the threat to shut down the Nord Stream 2, which provides gas and oil to European countries from Russia. You have the move to cut off funds for Russian bonds, to kick Russia out of the SWIFT monetary transactions system. Now you have the latest, the call for sanctions over an explosion in 2014 at an ammunition depot in the Czech Republic. The basic line coming from the British press is that everyone knows Russia did it. In fact, the two people that the British say were involved in the Skripal poisoning are the same two Russian agents who blew up the arms depot. Even the president of Czechia, Zeman, says their state security services found no evidence of Russian involvement. And as a result of that comment, he's now being subjected to a bill of impeachment from someone in the Czech parliament. So this gives you a sense of the complete craziness of this war drive. You know, it's almost as though you have a checklist that's being presented to people like Blinken and Biden and Dominic Raab, the British foreign minister, Stoltenberg, the NATO general secretary. If Ukraine's not in NATO, pour new weapons into Ukraine. Check. Coup in Belarus? Check. Starve children in Syria with humanitarian sanctions? Check. U.S. Strategic Command telling Congress that nuclear war is now thinkable? Check. And what does this mean when countries hear things like this? Well, fortunately, there are some sane voices. And we at the Schiller Institute are calling for those sane voices to come together at a conference we'll be having on May 9th, a week from this Saturday, to take up the whole question of reversing the war drive with cooperation on economic development. Now, here are some of the sane voices. You have Tulsi Gabbard, a military veteran, a former congresswoman, a candidate for president, who was on Tucker Carlson the other day warning that we are drifting towards a war which could be a nuclear war with Russia. And she presented a very stark image, this is her quote, of hundreds of millions of people dying and suffering, seeing their flesh burned from their bones. It's a useful image to have because that's what nuclear war does. And the fact that policymakers are now thinking that if we get into a conventional war and we start losing, how quickly do we decide to go to nuclear weapons? Then you have the U.S. Naval War College analyst Lyle Goldstein, who's written several articles recently warning of the danger of challenging Russia and China the way we are doing. And he particularly referred in this latest piece to Putin's announcement of red lines. He said Americans should ask the uncomfortable question: why do the U.S. and its allies appear to be encroaching upon so many different Russian red lines in so many situations simultaneously? He goes on to write, we should not be touching the red lines of the other major nuclear armed powers on a daily basis. We must learn to live amicably with Russia, or risk a continuing succession of showdowns on the pattern of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a crisis which nearly brought the United States and the Soviet Union to nuclear confrontation in October of 1962. At that time, we were fortunate that John F. Kennedy was the President of the United States, and he used back channels to the Soviets to pull back from that confrontation and made a determination that he would continue to work with Russian leaders to achieve a real détente. And that process was cut off by his assassination, most likely orchestrated by the same British connected American intelligence operatives who are bringing us the present crises. Now, the difference between 1962 and today is quite stark. Russia today has a far more powerful nuclear capability and nuclear arsenal than it did then. And secondly, despite the media efforts to portray Joe Biden as a miracle worker, as a brilliant guy, as a super president, he's not JFK. And the current leadership around him is made up of neoconservative hawks, people who look to war as a solution, both in the defense establishment as well as in the intelligence and diplomatic corps. Now, in reviewing the strategic geometry we face, Helga Zepp LaRouche made the following comment. She said, looking at the picture as a totality, it is absolutely horrifying. And she said, we must wake up the American people to this danger. Now, who's going to do that? The mainstream media, which is not going to tell you what's going on, will barely report Putin's address except to say that he threatened the United States, will not tell you the truth about what Ukrainian President Zelensky said that provoked a Russian mobilization when he said that Ukraine will take back Crimea and the Donbass. You don't get that reported to you. How about Europe Defender 21? Have you read anything about this massive mobilization going on in Europe, including in Eastern Europe, up to the Russian border? Have you been reading about the violation of promises made by President George H.W. Bush and James Baker to Soviet leaders that NATO would not move eastward if they dismantled the Warsaw Pact military alliance? No, you're not reading that because they're not covering it. If you go online to something from the Atlantic Council, you may hear about this, but they'll essentially tell you that the reason we have to do this is because Russia is a malign actor, because Russia is a bully, the Chinese are bullies, and they're looking to supplant the United States. What's the evidence for this? Well, the think tankers say it. So on May 9th, we'll be holding a conference which will include very important people from around the world, as well as the possibility for the American people to participate in a dialogue about how to overcome this existential crisis. That's what our job is, to give you both an understanding of what the enemies of this country are doing, who are the enemies, and why they're doing it, and what are their weaknesses and how can they be overcome. And we're the experts on this because of the work that was done over many years by Lyndon LaRouche on economics, on statecraft, and on science. So join us on May 9th, and in the meantime, spread the word around. Share this video. Scare your friends a little bit. Get them out of their mopes and their complacency. We need an active American people to seize the control of government back from the special interests of the military-industrial complex, the corporate cartels, the big tech Silicon Valley crowd, the Wall Street City of London crowd. It's the American people who should be shaping American policy to defend their interests. So thanks for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow.